Okay, so I figured out what we were doing wrong with the z-test. What was going on was that we were choosing just the z-test right here, but actually when we have one proportion, we're supposed to do the one proportion z-test, okay? So that's down here at number 5. So we just hit the wrong key. So let's go ahead and figure out how to do this, all right? So if I hit number 5, can you see the calculator? Okay, so the first thing it asks us is that it asks for our probability, which is 38. The second thing is x. You need to know that x is the number of successes. Now, it's not the expected number of successes, it's actually the number of successes that you observed. So a lot of times you're going to have to actually do the math here. We observed 45%, and we're trying to see how many that is. And so right here, you can actually type it in 0.45 times 200, and it calculates it for you. And then we have 200, that's our number, and we're going to see how many times we're greater than 45%. And you know what to do based on what your null hypothesis, or what your alternative hypothesis is. I'm just not going through that process with you now, because I just want to make sure you understand the steps in the calculator. And so our p-value is 0.021, okay? Now, sometimes what's going to happen is, let's say I had 205 here instead. If I go back and do this test, let's see if this works with 205, so 45 times 205, I get a decimal, right? And so watch what happens when I get a decimal. It's going to say an error. And so what happens there is because we're supposed to round it. So let's go back, and it's a 1 prop z test. And so 92.25 is just going to round to 92. And now you can find your p-value, okay? So again, if you do this and you get a mistake or you get an error, it's because one of your numbers aren't rounded and you need to round. So again, remember, x is the number of observed successes, okay? If I wanted to go down and do an interval for that, I would have to choose the z interval, but it's a 1 proportion z interval. So I choose that. My numbers are there, 92, and I'm going to change it back to 95% and calculate it, and there it will give it to you, okay? All right, and so now the next thing is if you have a 2 proportion, and really what happens here is it's the same thing, but you have to choose the 2 proportion z-test. So 2 proportion z-test, which is number 6, x1, that's going to be my expected here. So let's say 0.48 times 108. And that's 51.84. So let's put in 52. And then N1 is 108. And then my X2, 51 times 140, 71.4. So I'm going to change that to 71, 140, and let's see what happens. And so the p-value is 65% of the time you would get that difference. Because here you got to remember when you're comparing them, they're going to base them off of 0. And so we can go from there. Okay? And so the p-value is 65. All right? So hopefully that helps. Hopefully this graphic organizer kind of helps. Just remember that it's the number of successes from what you actually got. Okay? All right. If you have questions, make sure you guys are emailing me.